The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, the deadly epidemic invading Chicago's suburbs. Heroin use is surging in America. How DuPage County finds itself in the epicenter.
The clock is ticking. Will congressmen from Illinois support the president if he orders an attack on Syria after the chemical attack that killed more than 1,000 civilians?
Plus, what would we do without the drive-thru? Pull up and roll down your car window for food, money, even a prayer. These stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Suburban police are battling a deadly epidemic.
Heroin used to be an inner city problem, but not anymore. People of all ages, from the inner city to affluent suburbs, are getting hooked on heroin and dying at alarming rates.
And where are they getting this drug? It's coming down the heroin highway, known to most of us as the Eisenhower Expressway. Tonight,
we hear from a survivor who battled his way back from addiction and from those on the front lines waging war on this menace.
Mostly A student. I was in the AP classes, honor roll, all that stuff.
27-year-old Bill Patrianakos grew up like most kids in southwest suburban Homer Glen. He had a small, loving family and big dreams.
I was accepted to Loyola, and I went there for a year. I was going to become a doctor. I was in the pre-med program, but I also became a heroin addict too.
Bill says he got high nearly every single day for 5 years. First, a few pills he found around the house to self-medicate his depression, then marijuana and cocaine. When the pills got too expensive, he moved on to heroin.
I went online and I looked for where everyone was getting arrested for heroin, and I drove straight there. And it took me about 20 minutes to find a guy who was willing to sell to me.
That place, Chicago's west side, right off the Eisenhower Expressway, at almost every exit between Harlem and the Loop, a stretch known by addicts and police officers as the heroin highway.
It's like a candy store.
Clean and sober for about 6 years now, Bill works as a web developer and sits on the board of an organization called HERO, or Heroin Epidemic Relief Organization. Two suburban fathers, John Roberts and Brian Kirk, founded the group after both losing sons to heroin.
We have all the evidence to prove that this is a serious epidemic, and it's an epidemic that's aimed right at our children.
Heroin is the next health crisis in this country.
Kathleen Burke is CEO at the Robert Crown Center for Health Education. The center works with suburban schools to educate students about the dangers of heroin. Burke says just saying no doesn't work with teens. They want the truth.
We tell them now, you're high. When you start using heroin, it's really pleasant. You know, it's a high that you want to chase the rest of your life.
And that's the problem. Kathleen says the drug is toxic and sinister.
It changes your brain. It changes the way in which your brain functions, and it keeps you craving the drug. Even if you've been through rehab, you continually crave that drug.
The Robert Crown Center uses an animated presentation as part of its effort to reach young people. Bill says teens need to hear the whole story, the pleasure and the pain associated with drug use.
Right now, health education is about scaring you into not doing it, not being honest with the kids in terms of telling them, yeah, you know what, drugs do feel good. That's why people do them.
In hard-hit DuPage County, where they've seen nearly 1 overdose death a week, law enforcement officers educate teens and parents while cracking down on dealers and users. Just last week, they helped make dozens of arrests in a heroin ring allegedly led by a Chicago man whose underlings delivered the drugs to DuPage County. The state's attorney there, Robert Berlin, is spearheading efforts to battle heroin. Your office in the DEA last week made 31 arrests in a drug bust that went on for about 6 months. You broke up a heroin ring. How big of a difference do you think that'll make?
I think in the short term, it will make a difference. I think drug dealers will be concerned about coming into DuPage County to sell their heroin. In the large picture, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Kind of daunting. We often think of heroin as an inner city problem, but clearly it's gotten its hooks into the suburbs. What are you seeing?
What we're seeing is kids as young as high school age, young adults, and professionals actually all the way up into their 60s are getting addicted to heroin. It's easy to get, it's cheap, and there's tons of it out there.
How big is the problem? Talk about what you're seeing on a daily basis and a weekly basis in DuPage County.
We have a real problem in this county, and it's not just DuPage County. Will County, Lake County, all of the suburban areas are experiencing it. But we had in 2012 38 heroin overdose deaths, and in this year, in the last the first 8 months of the year, 33. So that's 71 heroin overdose deaths in 20 months. That is an epidemic.
Why are people dying?
The heroin today is 10 times more powerful than it was in the 60s. And it's easy to use. You don't have to inject it anymore, which is why so many people have gotten attracted to it. You can smoke it and you can snort it, but because it's so powerful, it's killing people. And then we see kids who will be off it for a while, and then when they relapse, their tolerance level is very low and they use too much, and as a result they overdose and end up dying.
Your office must see a lot of this. How heartbreaking is it for you to witness this week after week, the toll it takes on people and families?
It's terrible and it's gut-wrenching. I've met a number of parents of children who've died from overdoses on heroin, and they live with this every day. It's something that they experience, and yes, you feel their pain.
Talk about where this drug is coming from. I mean, this is kind of something that's gotten bigger and bigger over time, is it not?
No question. Most of the heroin in this county, people are getting from the city. And we've heard the term heroin highway, and there is a heroin highway. It's the Reagan Expressway, which leads into 290. These suburban kids are traveling into the city. They get off the expressway. There's a number of drug spots that they go to. They get their heroin, they get back on the expressway, they come back out to the county. And it's very easy to get. Now, most of the heroin that we're seeing is coming from Mexico. It's the Mexican cartels.
As someone in law enforcement and someone who prosecutes some of the people who use and sell this, how do you make a dent in this? How do you stop it?
There's a two-pronged approach that we're taking out here. The first is the educational component. We're trying to get into the schools. I've been participating in these heroin forums in DuPage County for the last year and a half. Going to the schools, going to the communities, educating parents and children on what heroin is, the dangers of it, how to avoid it, and what to look out for. That's the first approach. The second approach is the law enforcement approach. And this heroin bust that we just had last week will certainly make a difference. But the problem is, for every drug dealer we take off the street, there's 5 more that are ready to take that spot and continue the trade. So it's going to require a lot of resources, but it's a multi-pronged approach.
And this is big business.
Huge business. The ring that we just took down last week, they were bringing in anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 a day in heroin sales.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, you just wonder what that looks like in terms of how many people are then using the drug.
It's a drug that we're seeing through all economic sectors, people from many different walks of life. It's not just students and young adults. We've seen professionals get hooked on heroin, middle-aged adults. We had two overdose deaths this year. The people were in their 60s. So it is it's a problem that really hits every sector of society.
When you look at this, how do people get hooked? I mean, is it a matter of people just trying it once, or does this have to do with the epidemic of pain medication that you're seeing in this country?
Pain medication there's certainly a correlation between your drugs like OxyContin, Vicodin, Percodan. Those kind of drugs have the same effect on the body as heroin. So we have seen a correlation between the two. And many times, people, when they run out of those drugs, they can't get any more, they will then turn to heroin. And it gives them the same feeling, the same sensation. In many cases, you use it once, you get addicted. And that's because the drug is so strong. It's so much more powerful today than it used to be.
You know, what was interesting to me is that a lot of people are now talking about more widespread use of an antidote for overdosing. It's kind of an EpiPen type of a drug that you would use for overdosing, and people are talking about the distribution of that to deal with this epidemic. What are your feelings on the distribution of this drug to help people who overdose?
Actually, we are putting a program together in DuPage County to supply police departments with Narcan, which is the antidote. And it has immediate effects, and it will absolutely save lives. We've had a couple of meetings. Rich Jorgensen, our coroner, is very involved with this, and the police departments are on board. We hope to have a protocol in place shortly. And many times the police departments, police officers at the scene are there before an ambulance gets there. And time is of the essence when someone is overdosing. And this will save lives. I don't think it's promoting the use of heroin, but the reality is people are using it, and every life we can save makes it worth it.
To that end, talk about the Good Samaritan law. That went into effect this past year, too. The governor had signed a law about overdosing and people with drugs to kind of save lives.
Correct. In July of 2012, the law went into effect. And the law provides somebody with immunity from prosecution for under 3 grams of heroin if the police find the heroin as a result of somebody overdosing. So it encourages people to call the police, call an ambulance if you're with someone who is experiencing an overdose, and you don't have to be afraid that the police are going to then arrest you because they find heroin.
Now, with these, basically this is organized crime in terms of the Mexican cartels coming in and selling these drugs. How do you go at them? What is your plan to go after the people who are bringing this heroin into your county?
Well, we can control at the local level, try and go after the drug dealers bringing the heroin into DuPage County. The case that we had last week, this was a local operation. They were operating in DuPage and Cook County. The cartel members is really more of a federal operation, and the DEA, I know, is very active trying to get all the way up that chain to try and get those big organizations bringing the drugs into the country.
Robert Berlin, DuPage County State's Attorney, we thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
Now, some other trending stories tonight. What to do about Syria? Is it a lose-lose decision? Chicagoans weigh in. And Minneapolis offers to tie the knot for gay couples from Illinois. Debate rages in Washington and in the Illinois congressional delegation over whether to attack Syria after that August chemical attack killed more than 1,400 civilians.
This is behavior outside the circle of civilized human behavior.
But what kind of force is justified? And where do Illinois congressmen stand? On the brink of a big decision.
Introducing more aggression into this situation will cause more chaos and more violence.
Governor Quinn wants to keep his job, and he wants some Illinois residents to make more money at theirs.
You know, there's something wrong if somebody works 40 hours a week and lives in poverty. That's not right.
His pitch for an increase in the minimum wage as the governor's race heats up.
We, as a Republican Party, must reach into communities of diversity.
And 2 Republican candidates choose their running mates. Dan Rutherford and Kirk Dillard make their early picks for lieutenant governor. Food desert no more. A big announcement for one of Chicago's struggling neighborhoods.
Today we announced Whole Foods is coming to Inglewood.
A huge new store to be completed by 2016 promises healthier food choices for residents of the South Side community. Gay couples may not have the state's blessing in Illinois, but they do in Minnesota.
What other incentives are they offering? Why would a gay couple leave Chicago?
The mayor of Minneapolis inviting Illinois couples up north to get hitched.
If Minnesota and Minneapolis specifically are willing to roll out the welcome mat and give us full marriage equality as opposed to a skim milk marriage, then, let me book my train ticket.
And joining us to dig into these headlines, our panel tonight, philanthropy strategist Lisa Dietland, columnist and author Anthony Stanford, and talk show host Tzitziki Felix. Welcome to everybody.
Thank you.
So Senator Durbin, Illinois Senator Durbin, voted with the narrow majority to approve a military strike on Syria. Lisa, right choice?
I think it is. You know, there's been much discussion, Chris, about whether the United States should be the policeman of the world. And the fact is 46 cents out of every dollar spent on military operations comes from the U.S., and that's globally. So I think we have a role. I think we're scared and we're war weary in this country, and we have to be cautious and careful as we move in. But the fact is, when chemical weapons are used against its own people, and 2 million people have emigrated or left Syria in the past 6 years, something needs to be done.
Anthony?
Yes, I would agree with that assessment. I think the 10-7 vote in the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, however, forecasts that there may be larger problems looming as the vote goes to the House. I've talked with several people, constituents who live in the western suburbs, and while they understand the impact and the effect on the Syrian people, they are also looking at what has been deemed to be progress in our economy. And I think that that is having a major impact on how people look and how they might ask their legislators to vote on the issue.
Titi, you're in Congress. For the sake of argument,
you know,
what do you vote?
What I believe is that Obama made the right choice this time. He actually went through Congress instead of making the decision himself. And I think that is crucial, because it's not just one person making the decision and saying, we're doing this because I'm the president of the United States. He actually put the whole responsibility on a lot of people, and that gives us a different perspective. Now, when you consider that 1,400 people died through chemical weapons, and we're considering a very important element here. It's not a good death. It's suffering, it's torture, it takes time.
And hundreds of these, as Nancy Pelosi said in the setup, were children.
It takes it to a very different level, and if we have a certain ability to put a stop to it, even more so, the ramifications that might come after that, why not?
You know, it's interesting that the support from the Illinois delegation is very qualified. Let's look at a couple of statements here. First from Senator Durbin, who did vote with the majority in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But he says if we can do something to discourage Assad, the president of Syria, without engaging in a war and without making a long-term military commitment. And then Senator Mark Kirk, Republican from Highland Park, would oppose a resolution that authorizes boots on the ground but would support a narrow authorization for a missile strike. Are they trying to have it both ways here?
I think it's a good strategy. I think they're trying to make sure that less people are lost, and that the more contained the war itself will be, the better for everyone.
But once you start bombing, who knows what happens?
Absolutely.
There are unintended consequences.
There are unintended consequences, but I do think there is a little bit of wanting to have it both ways. I think they have an eye on the election and maybe even the primary and having a primary challenge, Chris. But the fact of the matter is, we saw a Holocaust in the 1940s happen in Europe, and we said never again. And we saw a Holocaust happen in Rwanda, and we said never again. Are we beginning to see that happen in Syria? And are we going to stand by and 30 years from now say, gosh, we should have done something? So I think this cautious approach and wanting it both ways is probably a natural place to be, given the two wars that we've been involved in so long.
And you mentioned politics, which allows us to turn the corner to the Illinois gubernatorial race, which kicked off unofficially this week, Labor Day. And Governor Quinn seems to be making an economic argument. He's saying, I want to raise the minimum wage, which in Illinois is now $8.25 an hour, to a living wage. Is that the right tack to take, do you think?
I think you got to take it from different standpoints. You know, I'm having a talk show, I talk about this issue every single day. The economy in the Latino community, or even the levels of people living under poverty levels in the U.S. Absolutely, there's a lot of people that would love to make more money. But have we considered what kind of impact is that going to have on small businesses that are trying to even create more jobs for the population, and how is that going to interpret itself within the economy of the U.S.?
Anthony, is it the government's role?
I think it is the government's role to step in and to make sure that people who are working full-time are not living at a poverty level. I think that when we look at some of the proposals locally, if I can go there, locally when we talk about bringing new enterprise into areas that are downtrodden, where people have not, where the median income is $20,000, that obviously these people are going to need more money to survive.
And I would disagree about the argument made about business owners. I'm a business owner, and I think that you have to pay your employees a living wage, if not a wage where they can thrive. You know, if I want my employees to do a good job for our clients, they need to not be worried about a second job they need to get to at night. They need to have health insurance. They need to have that safety net as a business owner that I can provide. Otherwise, what is the point of being in business? To make a bunch of money? You know, my friends laugh at me and they say, my gosh, that should be your #1 goal. And my accountant and my bookkeeper get frustrated at times. But I said, you know, I want my employees to know there's a safety net, that they're not worried about what soup kitchen am I going to tonight, what bread line am I going to stand in, what pantry am I going to access to be able to feed my family. I want them to have a good job with a good wage and with those benefits that they need, so that if they have a toothache, they can go to the dentist, that they're not sitting there thinking, I don't have the money to do that, or I have to make a decision. You know, do I go to the dentist or do I buy groceries this week?
And speaking of groceries, this week it's been announced that a Whole Foods is coming to Englewood here on the south side of Chicago, a community which is economically struggling. It's going to get a city subsidy of about $10 million. The joke about Whole Foods has always been it takes a whole paycheck to shop there. Is this the right move?
I think so. You know, the obesity levels in the U.S. are huge, and it's increasing in the Latino community as well as the African American community. And I believe that this is just one little element of so many things that need to take place in order to increase the awareness of better healthy eating. Now, considering that they're going to try to create a better choice with lower prices, make it more accessible.
Well, that's the question, isn't
better.
it? I mean, healthy eating, but at what cost? Because it's known as a chain that caters to relatively affluent customers.
Yes, that is true. And I don't know if it's part of Emmanuel's strategy to build it and they will come, and then others will follow. But I'm familiar with Whole Foods, and it is not a grocery chain where people who are not, I shouldn't say affluent, but certainly people who are not living beyond the median income are able to go and shop every day and find the nourishment for their families at an affordable price.
And I would argue, you know, that no matter what level income that you have, you should have access to good quality food. You know, one of the comments often made is, why are Americans obese when we don't eat like the French? You know, they have cream and butter and all this.
And wine.
And wine, of course. And why aren't they? And part of the issue is that they pay the exact price point for what food costs. Food is expensive. Unfortunately, in this country, about 80 years ago, the government came up with a farm bill to subsidize the 3 most high-caloric food, corn, soy, and sugar, because we were an undernourished nation. Well, guess what, Chris? It worked. We're now, 80 years later, a very overnourished nation because food that is high in calories is subsidized. So the mom packing a lunch for her kids can buy a week's worth of Twinkies cheaper than a bag of carrots. Something's wrong with that picture. And I think a Whole Foods coming into Englewood might be the first step in helping reverse that, especially if their commitment here is like in Detroit, provide those items at a lower price point.
Last thing we want to get to today, the mayor of Minneapolis is in Chicago recruiting gay Chicagoans and Illinoisans to go to Minneapolis to get hitched because, as we know, Illinois still does not allow gay marriage. What about this, poaching couples, taking them to Minneapolis to get them married?
Well, I believe that that's a slap on the wrist for Illinois. You know, I think we're a very progressive state. We're very political, a lot of things happening in this state, and we're still not there. I think we should be more compassionate, and we should learn a little bit more. And we were sharing with Lisa a little comments before. You know, it can be a peer strategy, which maybe it
marketing.
is.
I think it's a tourism marketing
Absolutely.
strategy, Chris. I mean, you know, every state is trying to get people to come for tourism, whether it's Pure Michigan, come back to New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. What about the Gulf Coast after the BP oil spill? I think it's a brilliant strategy to get people to go to Minneapolis. My question is, Are they going to have a gift certificate for the Mall of America? I mean,
Well, Anthony, does this send a message to Illinois legislators who were dragging their heels on this issue in the last session?
I believe it certainly does. I think that not only for Illinois, but we have 13 states that now have same-sex marriage equality on the books. And I believe that the border states are now realizing, and very astutely, that they are going to test the states that have been reluctant to do so. And they are going to show through the economic power or whatever is necessary that these states and these legislators need to rethink their position.
All right, Anthony, on that note, we are out of time. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much. Lisa Dietlin, Anthony Stanford, and Tsitsi Felix, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Every year, Americans make almost 13 billion stops at fast food drive-ins, 13 billion. And in Chicago, among other places, you can increasingly conduct almost any kind of business from the front seat of your car. Like most Americans, Chicagoans love their drive-thrus. It's where we get our money, food, medicine, and even help for our soul.
How can we pray for you, buddy?
Motorists in suburban Aurora can pull up and pray.
It's not every day you see some signs up saying drive-through prayer. And I mean, I looked for the first turnaround to come in here.
A service that Livingstone Christian Church began offering 3 years ago.
People who have never stepped a foot in the church before, and they're coming because they saw a sign and they felt that was a sign from God. I need to go, and they don't even know really what they're coming for, but when they come, they're blessed.
This prayer service is just the latest incarnation of the drive-thru, which found its place in America 8 decades ago.
The natural venue for a drive-in window is something like a bank, where all you have to do is bring the car and the teller close by. That was already done in the 1930s.
Also in the 1930s, people took to the roads in their cars for what was then known as the drive-in restaurant.
As you pulled up, a young lady in a short skirt and on roller skates would come sweeping out and say, "May I take your order?" Then they'd swoop back in, get the order, bring it out, and put it on a tray on your window. From that, it was a hop, skip, and a jump to saying, we could make that easier if we could bring the client's car close to the fast food place. That's the beginning of the drive-in window.
Over the years, a wide range of businesses put a new twist on the drive-thru. A hospital in California offered emergency room care. Las Vegas chapels made marriage a lightning-quick affair. And at one time, a Chicago funeral parlor offered drive-up visitation services. These days, it's hard to find a motorist who doesn't like the convenience of a drive-thru.
I'm in and I'm out and I'm off on to where I'm going.
And so it began, America's love affair with the drive-thru.
What could be more emblematic of America? You drive to a fast food restaurant that has a window, the kids order, the food comes, you keep on your way, the kids may squabble over the extra set of French fries, but life is good. That's America.
As American as it gets. That does it for us tonight. You are now in the loop.
The conversation continues right now on WYCC.org. I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Until next week, good night.